Hello, everyone. Just to start off, a quick show of hands for anyone here who's taken a DNA test before. Anyone? Okay, sweet. Have you found relatives that you didn't know existed before? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's what this project's all about. This is the Red River Relations Metis Nation DNA project. This is the first genetic genealogy project of its kind for the Metis Nation. Genetic genealogy is basically genealogy that uses DNA. So, about me, my name is Tony Masiuk. I am the administrator and the creator of this project. I'm a Metis Nation citizen of the Manitoba Metis Federation. My family roots are with the Stevens, Taylor, Fiddler, Folds, Saviston, and Prince families of the St. Andrews area of Red River and later the Prince Albert area of Saskatchewan. I have a degree in anthropology, primarily cultural, and also some background in Indigenous Studies. I've been working with genetic genealogy for about 10 years now, and I'm currently training as a professional in the field. So before I get too much into the sciencey stuff, I kind of just want to lay down some context as to what I mean by Metis Nation and what Metis means, for two really important reasons. One reason being that there's a lot of confusion as to what Metis means, and secondly because there's really good reasons why DNA is very much particularly applicable to Metis, especially. And actually this photo, by the way, is what a Metis family looked like in the late 1800s. So it all comes down to this process called ethnogenesis. You might not be familiar with this term, but what it basically means is the process whereby a people becomes a people on a land in a particular time, especially in the sense of distinguishing that people from other peoples. That could be the parent groups from which that group came from originally. It could be other groups that that group lives with on the land, related groups, groups that are similar, etc. Now, one of probably the biggest misconception about Métis people in general is that we're just mixed race. That anyone who has Indigenous and European ancestry at the same time is automatically Métis. This is not the case. All Métis people are mixed. Our history did begin through mixture between European men from England, France, Scotland, and Indigenous women, primarily Cree and Anishinaabe. However, not every single person who is mixed is a Métis person, because there was a distinct identity that formed through this process of ethnogenesis. So this happens roughly between 1812 and 1870. I picked those dates because 1812 is when the Red River Settlement, which is sort of our cultural hub, was founded, and 1870 is colonial control. This happens basically in the prairie geography, more or less, so that red area on the map. Now the borders aren't exact, forgive me, but it's more or less that area where Métis lived historically and became Métis. In this process, unique cultural components had developed and emerged. These would be things like the Michif language, the Bungi language, the Red River Cart, Red River Jig, sash patterns, Louis Riel, beadwork, all that kind of stuff. But there's one thing that really stands out, and that's our kinship structures. So why is kinship so important to us? There's a really good reason for this, and it starts with understanding what our kinship actually is. It's really important to understand our kinship like it's a really tightly interconnected web with many strands in this web that are overlapping and intersecting with each other. You could think of it like it's one giant extended family, that any person who's Métis can find any other person who's Métis in their own family tree, because it's one family tree, and usually numerous ways over, not necessarily through blood, but through various forms of kinship ties. So that leads me to say that our group identity is affirmed through these relations. We recognize kinship as a way to determine who's a Métis person. In fact, it's even customary at Métis events, or if you meet a Métis person, to kind of introduce yourself, like I did at the beginning of this presentation, with your surnames, with your family connections to the places that you are rooted in. And it's our way of kind of acknowledging each other as belonging to the same peoplehood and the same community. One of the historical reasons for all of this is the fact that our Métis settlements were so highly interconnected historically over the homeland in that area that I showed. Reasons for this being that the Métis were highly mobile. Métis used, they hunted buffalo, they had Red River carts, they moved around a lot, they didn't tend to stay in the same place. And they also had really large families, 5, 10, 15 kids, and they'd all branch off and move around between these settlements and reinforce kinship ties between them. There was also a fairly small number of families to begin with, probably fewer than 500 over this very large geographic area, meaning that makes the kinship very, very, very tight-knit. As well, our kinship is extremely well documented. So basically from the entire period that Métis have been a people, there's documentation that exists to document the kinship, which is, you cannot say that for most ethnic groups. Most ethnic groups had ethnogenesis events a long time ago. Métis being post-contact, it's been more recent, and there's all sorts of different documentations like census, birth, marriage, death, script, Hudson Bay Company records, all that kind of stuff. But this is really important for DNA particularly. DNA and genetic genealogy is not meant to replace traditional genealogy. It's meant to take it to the next level. It's meant to expand upon where genetic genealogy, or where, traditional genealogy has its limitations. Oh yeah, by the way, this picture, this is actually my family. So these are my third great grandparents, Mary Ann Taylor and her husband Jeremiah Dice Stevens, and then her brother Edward Taylor Jr. Now this is a Métis script document. Just wanted to show this. This is my from my ancestor Edward Taylor, not the previous Edward Taylor, but their father. Yeah, a lot of names are recycled in Métis kinship, by the way. Yeah, but yeah, so you can see just how convoluted this whole process was. It was really basically a system. It was like an individual treaty that extinguished our Aboriginal rights. But there's also a lot of genealogical information included on this kind of documentation. So, are you part of Métis kinship or not? This is a really important question that our governments use actually to determine our citizenship. So when you apply to one of our self-governments like Manitoba Metis Federation or Metis Nation, Alberta, or whatever, you have to submit a stamped off genealogy of your ancestors. And they will go through that and check with documentation such as script, actually often script, to see if you are part of this kinship structure or not. So that's really important. And also, right now, it's not as simple as taking a DNA test and you just find out if you're Métis, but I'm trying to change that in a way where we can revolutionize DNA for Métis, and we can actually start to answer that question if you're part of Métis kinship using DNA. So here's the actual project. So like I said, this is the first of its kind project for Métis genetic genealogy. Métis have largely been neglected even from studies involving DNA. There have been traditional genealogy projects done for Métis, such as Gail Moran's books or Warren Sinclair Files, George Denny Papers, etc. But there are limitations to that kind of to traditional genealogy. There are gaps in the records. There are disputed parentages. There are adoptions. There are name changes. There are various historical mysteries that we cannot reconcile with traditional documentation that only DNA really can solve. And so that's kind of what this project aims to do, is to fill in some of those gaps. So what I'm really doing is collecting DNA data and DNA information from people who volunteer it to the project or otherwise make it publicly available. And I'm working on organizing and interpreting this data. Like right now I have a spreadsheet where I have every single person who's in the project. I have their, what's called a kit number. I have their surnames. I got their ancestral locations, all this stuff. And I'm trying to work on getting them all into a Métis Nation master tree, which is essentially, like I mentioned, the Métis kinship is like one giant extended family tree. It's like mapping that entire extended family tree into an online interactive family tree. Now, this is obviously going to be a very long work in progress. There's going to be hundreds and thousands of us in this project, or it's sort of in that tree. But it's important to get everybody in that project into that tree so we can use the DNA can sort it all out. So there is a third-party matching service called GEDmatch. It's actually free, but basically you can download your raw genomic data from any of these commercial tests like Ancestry, DNA, MyHeritage, whatever, and you upload it onto GEDmatch, and you can match with people from any of these other companies. Because normally, matching is proprietary to the company. So if I take a test at Ancestry DNA, I can only see my matches who have also tested at Ancestry DNA. I can't see matches who've tested at the other companies. And so when you upload to GEDmatch, you can match with people from any of those other companies who've uploaded to GEDmatch. The other thing is that some companies like Ancestry and currently 23andMe don't have what's called a chromosome browser, which lets you see the genomic locations in the chromosomes where the segments that you share with a cousin actually are, which is very, very integral to doing anything meaningful with genetic genealogy. So the Ancestor project, this is a service on GEDmatch. Basically what it is like a bank of kits that all belong to a shared ancestry group. So for us, it's Métis. I have over 800 kits right now, and I'm working very steadily to get up to 1,000 pretty quick. Basically, members can run their matches, which is like doing a comparison, runs a comparison between their genomic data and everyone else in the project, and it will show you where in the actual chromosomes they match a segment or multiple segments. And through that, we can determine the shared ancestors with that person's match. And we can assign those segments, like the raw data, segment data, to ancestors. I'm going to get into that in just a sec. But here is what a match list looks like. So this is mine. You can see there it says like chromosome, CHR is like chromosome, so chromosome 2 at the top there, the locations. CM is centimorgans. It's basically sort of like how much DNA is shared, et cetera. So you copy and paste this data into another tool that we're working on called DNA Painter. This is a really cool tool that lets you assign that match data from each segment to an actual ancestor. So like that red section there on chromosome 5, for example, I determined that I inherited that from Peter Fiddler, who was sort of like a really important progenitor of the Metis Nation. A lot of people who are Métis descend from Peter Fiddler. Yeah, so me too. So when a new person joins the project, say, and let's just say they're adopted or they're disconnected or they don't know their roots, and they also match on that same segment, we can safely say that that person is also a descendant of Peter Fiddler. And they might not have been able to find that out in any other way. So also, if we, theoretically, by the way, if we had enough segments of DNA from somebody like Peter Fiddler, let's just say, we could theoretically reconstruct their entire genome. And we could actually run their genome into the project. And we could even determine things like traits and all kinds of cool stuff. But what really matters here is getting as many people as possible sorted out with this. So what I mean is having a DNA Painter profile for every single person in the project, having one for as many ancestors as possible, and disentangling all those different segments that we have found that are matches between people in the project and figuring out which ancestors they came from. This is obviously a huge work in progress. Right now, this is really in the prototype stages, but I envision this project going very far to the point where we can eventually disentangle all of those matches, and there will come a convergence point where any person any Métis person can run their kit into this project, and we could almost instantly see where they actually fit into the kinship structures with enough of this information figured out. And that we wouldn't even need to even look at traditional genealogy at all. That's what I meant before when I said we can determine who is Métis based on their DNA eventually. So this is perfect for people who are adopted. This is perfect for disconnected people or whoever. But it's really a collective effort. We need to have as many people in this project as possible for this to work ideally. So it's really a collective effort. Another piece of information that I'm collecting is called haplogroups. Now, I'm not going to bore you too much with the science, but basically on that chart, it shows paternal maternal lines. So unlike your rest of your DNA, there we have Y chromosome DNA and mitochondrial. Y chromosome DNA is inherited through your father's line, just like a surname is, and this is only for males. And then for males and for females, we have mitochondrial DNA is inherited through the maternal line, so your mother's line all the way back in time. And what's really important to know about this, basically, is that this can rule in or out shared ancestors along those particular lines. So this is extremely useful for cases where ancestors might have disputed parentages, or they might have multiple spouses and we don't know which parent the child is from, or there's a name change, or there was a non-parental event, or something like that is really, really useful for that, or even finding out national or tribal origins for people. We can do that with mitochondrial and Y chromosome DNA. And currently I have a few dozen of these haplogroups recorded right now, and even one that's in dispute, so pretty cool stuff. So another thing is sequencing historical genomes. Now this is really cool. I'm sure most of you know who this is. Louis Riel, it says right there. But Louis Riel is like our most infamous historical figure ever. And see, when he died, people took clippings of his hair locks, and they're stored in museums in Canada, including one at the Glenbow Museum in Calgary. And theoretically, we could get that forensically tested and actually put into the project. And I'm looking into that possibility right now. This was actually done with Beethoven's DNA not that long ago, where he also had a lock of his hair taken and they forensically tested it. Now you can match with Beethoven in DNA databases, which is pretty cool. And hopefully we could do this for lots of ancestors for whom biological examples are out there. So really the bigger picture with all of this comes back to rebuilding our Metis Nation kinship. what we have to understand with our history is that since colonization, we had a massive fragmentation event take place, basically a mass assimilation, where after like 1870, 1885, with the influx of settlers into the Métis homeland and the takeover by Canada, there was so many people stopped identifying as Métis. Many people assimilated. It was not favorable to identify with being a Métis person. And so I call these people the lost generations, people who have lost their identities over this time. And I believe that genetic genealogy is one of those tools that we can use that can provide a pathway back to the community and the culture for such individuals, especially for those who have no information. So people who are adopted, people who are estranged from their families, or those kinds of cases, or even residential school victims, or 60 Scoop, all kinds of things like that. Another thing that's important to understand is that that identity for Indigenous people especially is not an individual thing. You're not an individual who is Indigenous. You are part of a collective that is Indigenous. And the same principle applies in this case for intergenerational trauma that has happened through this fragmentation. That, like I said before, our entire kinship structure is like one giant family tree, right? One giant extended family, and that intergenerational trauma has rippled through that entire family. So it's not just my family that has intergenerational trauma; it's the whole nation, right? And I believe that reconnection for every single individual that has been lost through these lost generations is a healing not just for that individual and their family, but for the entire nation collectively. Now, so where do Métis fit into this cultural mosaic of Canada, right? I look at Métis as we're basically the forgotten Indigenous nation. There's so much confusion, so much misinformation about who Métis are. There's a lot of, we're often forgotten in the discourses in general. And this is despite us playing such an integral role in the history of Canada. Like, for example, that photo there, that is the 49th Rangers. The 49th Rangers were basically a band of Métis scouts that were hired to protect the surveyors who were surveying the Canada-US border in 1872, 1873. My ancestor, Edward Taylor, is in that photo. He was one of the scouts, and so was his brother, Robert. And lots of Métis people have history like this that was so integral to the history of Canada that is often just forgotten and sidelined. But yeah, preserving Métis identity, like on this theme of heritage, we are part of the diversity of what exists within Canada, and notably before Canada, because we did exist before Canada was a country. Even though we're a post-contact people, we do predate Canada. And through this process of colonization, becoming Canadian was a rather violent process for us. But today, now that we're in a post-colonial context, I believe part of being Canadian is knowing where you come from, and that's kind of how we reconcile and we heal from this whole process. And that's not just for us as Métis or even Indigenous peoples generally, but I think for all people, it's important that we all know where we come from, and we can all sort of recognize our place in this society. So, so I hope that I may have convinced you about the power of DNA and what we can do with that. I encourage you to take a DNA test, and maybe you'll find out you're Métis. Maybe not, and even if not, there's, like I said, there's still so much value to doing this, even if you're not Métis. For everybody, I think there's always value for connecting with your heritage, and for me, I value all parts of my heritage. I'm not exclusively Métis, and all of it is very near and dear to me. So, so if any of you know people who are Métis, like in the way that I described, and I would highly recommend that you send them this way. You can find the group on Facebook called Red Revelations Metis Nation DNA. I have a page and a group there, and email is redriverrelations@gmail.com. So thank you so much for listening.
For Tony, my question is, genealogy is often seen as something very personal to an individual and their family rather than a facet of the broader heritage field. For Métis people, as you have just emphasized, genealogy is vital to Métis heritage as a way to rebuild kinship systems and heal from the traumas of colonization. Métis genealogy focuses a lot on oral tradition as well as documents, and these oral traditions heavily rely on elders and knowledge keepers in our communities. What are some ways you have found in your work on the genealogy project to protect and preserve these stories so they are available and accessible to the next generation of Métis people?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say that genetic genealogy, like in the way that my project works, can in many cases vindicate oral traditions and give them added value in that sense. It can also provide information in the sense of when oral traditions are not actually passed down and they don't survive into the present day. Because genetic genealogy and oral traditions both provide information that was not written down. But more importantly, this really comes down to philosophy that as genealogists and precisely as genetic genealogists, we don't directly preserve oral traditions for the next generation, but in an indirect way we actually do, because we are preserving the next generation. People do not have a connection to oral traditions. Oral traditions do not have meaning for people if they do not exist in their communities, if they do not have a connection to living communities and living peoples who share oral traditions with people. So having access and a pathway to your community through something like genetic genealogy gives people the opportunity to become a recipient of that knowledge and themselves become stewards of that knowledge to pass it on themselves. And as a personal example even, when I first took a DNA test, I met a cousin who provided me with a recorded oral tradition that I had no idea existed, that was about my entire Métis family, all the way back basically back to contact. And there was all kinds of stories in there that I would have never had access to otherwise than through DNA. And I believe that lots of people could benefit similarly the way that I did. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I have one final question, and this is aimed at all of our panel speakers today. So you can answer in the same order you have been, or if somebody wants to go first, feel free. But my closing question for you all is, how can we ensure the heritage field continues to look beyond built heritage to intangible cultural heritage and landscapes?
First thing I would say is that we have to actually ascribe value to intangible culture. And we also have to understand the nature of how it gets preserved. What's important to know is that for physical culture, when people die, for the most part, that continues to exist. A building will continue to exist if people die. However, if people die, intangible culture dies with them. And I believe that how we preserve that is by keeping people connected, by keeping people connected with their identities, because all of intangible culture really comes down to people and peoplehood, and that is really like the glue that holds it all together. So at least my role in this is about people. It's about keeping people connected. It's about keeping people connected to their culture and their history and their identities, and I believe that inherently in and of itself preserves intangible culture.
Okay, thank you all so much. That is all I have for questions. So we have about 11 minutes to open for audience questions. So if anyone has a question, Alex is going to be my runner with the mic, so just put up your hand. Sorry, Walker.
Also, shout out to Tony. He's actually my cousin. So hence the whole little...
It's Métis kinship, right?
Métis kinship. There you go.
Hello. Question on the DNA project. Do you plan to expand that, make it known across Canada? The reason I'm asking is I worked on an 1817 house on the border between Quebec and Ontario. It was built by a former fur trader who, brought his, at the time, Indian, I think, Métis wife back with him to finally settle on the border between Quebec and Ontario. And so there's, I guess, a diaspora of Métis people across Canada that perhaps be interested as well in the project.
Are you meaning to ask if those people from that area would qualify for a role in the project?
I guess in part is just also, are you making it known quite widely that the project is available, and because there's going to be other people out there perhaps with ancestors that are of Métis ancestry.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, I want to get this project as widely known as possible. Like I said, it's really like a more the merrier sort of thing to get as many people, as many kits into the project as I possibly can. Although with the caveat in mind that every kit has to, every individual participating in the project has to meet criteria for being Métis, according to, I use the definitions that the Manitoba Metis Federation uses. But yeah, as long as the kits, as long as the individuals providing a kit meet criteria, absolutely, I would like to get as many people as possible into the project, even if they are, and they can be disconnected. They can be living outside of the homeland. Lots of people are living in diaspora today. There's Métis all over the world who are citizens. Yeah, the whole idea is to get everybody connected back. And I want to mention actually one thing too, that you don't have to be culturally fluent. You don't have to be raised in the culture, anything like that. It's the whole idea is to get people back into community. So
I will also just add that part of Tony being here is to raise awareness about the project. Tony has not actually said anything about it, but he does all of this work unpaid. This is purely a huge passion project of Tony. Sometimes I'll call him up and he'll just keep yapping for about an hour. So
I tend to do that.
He does. So again, the
I
reason
think
why
all of us do.
we do. But again, the reason why he's here is because we want to bring more attention to the project that he's working on. And so I saw a lot of you taking pictures. Please spread that to every single person that you know that would be interested, because that's why Tony's here. He unfortunately doesn't have a huge marketing budget. Otherwise, maybe more people would know. But that's why you guys are here. You can spread the word about his project, okay? We have one last question. I'm going to let you know that we're already getting close to time.
We got 3 minutes.
So let's, no, you're welcome to sit. Oh, Chuck Smith.
I was just wondering, Tony, when you start dabbling in DNA, do you get any kickback? Any people that are saying, you know, I don't want to be a part of that group and that kind of thing? I know, and I've done my DNA, and some people say, well, you know, that's not true, or it digs up old. Yeah, you know, people are denying it, and that prevalent, particularly in the Black community. And I don't know if it applies to the Métis community or not. Just wondering if you doing your project, do you get any kickback?
Yeah, excellent question. I was actually hoping somebody would ask that, because yeah, that happens all the time. Like, yeah, well, first of all, there's a lot of misconceptions about DNA and what we actually do with it. It's not all about ethnicity percentages. That's really like the weakest component of DNA. I don't really focus on that at all. It's really about the kinship connections. As well, a lot of people have hesitation to be testing over, the safety of DNA and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I am clear with people that there's a risk to it, just like there's a risk to using the internet. There's a risk to everything. There's nothing is risk-free with this. But in my view, the benefits massively outweigh any potential risks. I mean, what I tell people is when you go to the doctor and you get a blood test, your DNA is in there. I mean, the healthcare system has been hacked before. We're always taking risks with this kind of stuff. And I just believe that the value that we can derive from this is huge. But yeah, I mean, I do get pushback sometimes about it. But in my project, I try to educate people and just encourage the use of DNA. And yeah, and I mean, hopefully once this project really starts to bear some serious fruit, that will convince people of the power of it.
I was just going to say, I know that Tony and everybody up there has some really fascinating work, but I am mindful of time. I encourage you all to come and find them at the end of this presentation and continue your talking, continue your speaking with them. I know I hate to be that person, but I'm the clock master. I really got to. I'm so sorry, Chuck. But I am going to turn it over to Brianna, but please contact every single one of these folks. Come see them at the end of their presentation after I've taken a photo of them. Brianna.
All right. Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. Like we said, the intangible heritage is vital to Indigenous communities, and you all taking the time today to join us really means a lot. I also want to thank all of the speakers for their wonderful presentations and answers, so another round of applause for them.